to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duke Network, where we dive deep into Wildbow's most inhuman work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Execution 13.6. So, I think this is the chapter where Blake is the most villainous he's ever been. And to emphasize that, this chapter starts with him standing on the edge of a rooftop spying on his retreating foes who he has thoroughly, disheartened and murdered some of, and they're just kind of retreating, and he's like, how can I exploit this?
Yeah, I mean, he uses the term perched to describe how he's like standing on this rooftop, and it immediately drew my mind to the bird creature he became in that Drain's future vision that didn't go ahead yet. But yeah, like it's hard not to picture like, God, some anime villain or something just, standing on the roof looking down at the heroes as they're like trying to retreat. Like it just feels so evil villain. Like,
yeah.
I mean, if you want to be less charitable to him, it's a bit of a Golem move too.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no way to just the opening of this scene. It feels like we're seeing it from the villain's perspective as he's watching the heroes make their like retreat.
Yeah. And I think he lives up to that throughout the rest of the chapter pretty aptly. This chapter has a different feeling to the last chapter, right? It feels very cat and mouse. It feels very like hiding in the shadows and murdering somebody all of a sudden and then fading away into the darkness. There's this bit of then there's this chase sequence later on that's really, it just kind of feels like grimy. I don't know.
Yeah, I liked the term cat and mouse that you had here in the notes. Like, I think that really suits it. Like, it is a very different feeling. It's sort of, he's got them all in a clump, or two clumps, kind of, and he's just trying to pick them off one by one, which, that's what scary horror monster movies, scary movie monsters do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We get a note as well near the start of this chapter that the bell has gone quieter, which I guess is a good thing. Like, it feels like Molly is appeased for now, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, we're about to deal with that pretty explicitly.
Yeah. I think the other thing to keep an eye on throughout this chapter, something that I kind of really noticed on the second read-through, was how this chapter seems to be showing the Duchamps as a cohesive unit, I suppose, with some divisions in their ranks. I mean, they're starting out walking in two rows, right? But they really band together quite well this chapter, and Team Blake doesn't, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, referencing them as Team Blake feels very apt for this chapter, because it definitely seems to be all about Blake right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, last chapter and now this chapter are really our first ideas of how enchanting can work in combat. Like, I'd always wondered how they were meant to fight on the field.
Yeah.
Because I assume, I hadn't thought of the idea of, pinning people to the ground and stuff, and it makes sense, but, I love how attuned this concept is to targeting Blake specifically, because he's all about freedom. So the idea that the most common offensive thing that Duchamps is doing is pinning someone down and trapping them, and that actually scares him. Like, he kind of says, "Oh, I want to go fight the pyromancer," because that's the least scary to me. And it's like, you're made out of tree, and you want to go fight the fire person. Like, that really sort of shows his mental state right now. And obviously, we'll be talking a lot more about that as the chapter unfolds. But you're right. Like, just the way we're sort of, sorry, I kind of went off topic for a bit there, but the way we're seeing all the Duchamps work so closely together, and even though they're starting to get separated from their husbands, they feel like such a cohesive unit the way they work in threes. And I mean, I don't think it's an accident that they work in groups of threes very well together.
Yeah.
And Blake and his group of three are all over the place this chapter.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about Pact, right, is all these things just work so nicely. You mentioned the idea of the Duchamps being great foils for Blake because they're all about connections, which is something that Blake has struggled with his whole life and is kind of eschewing now. I absolutely love that. And it's kind of coalesced the thought of, I mean, we said something similar about the Behames when they were the main focus, right? They represented at points both Blake's past, which has obviously been something that he's been struggling to get away from, as well as his concept against his fight against his own expiry date, these concepts of time that so clearly tie into the Behemoths. It's the best thing about Pact, the fact that there's so many different meanings and nice coincidences that all just kind of pop up in the way the story unfolds. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
So, speaking of how the story unfolds, let's see how this chapter unfolds. Segue. So Blake is watching these Duchamps, and Molly basically coalesces behind him. And Blake basically has a conversation with her about whether he is keeping his end of the bargain here.
I love how when she appears, Blake does the whole... He doesn't even turn around, he's just like, hey, Molly. And it's like, she's like, how did you know it was me? It's such a villain move. Like, it's... I guess I'm just beating this drum, but like, it just feels like he is acting like a villain in every way.
Yeah, no, it's great, isn't it? He does this thing that I absolutely hate, though, where he basically says to Molly shows up and is giving him the benefit of the doubt and is being like, oh, somebody said that you were keeping some Duchamps alive, and of course I didn't believe them because we're buds. And Blake does this thing that I hate when people do, where he's just kind of like, no, I did it, and then doesn't extrapolate for a few seconds, which is like, It's very Blake to do. It's very movie monster Blake, but I mean, don't play games with the junior god. Like, just kind of explain what's going on, Blake. Like, say, no, I did it, but it's because of this, rather than just, no, I did it, and then a dramatic pause.
Yeah, I agree. He's been doing it more and more in the last few arcs, and it drives me nuts. I think we've talked about it before. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine in films. And I get like why he's doing it here. Like, I'm not sort of criticizing how the story works, because it does feel like he just does it as a bit of a theatrical thing.
Yeah.
Like, because he's smarter than that, right? So he's just sort of like, no, you heard right. And then he just kind of lets her fume for a bit, and he's like, but let me explain. It's like, just explain it the first time. Like, why are you being like this?
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, so basically Blake maybe almost convinces her. It's a little bit uncertain whether she is convinced or not. But Molly disappears. And actually Blake says something interesting where he says, damn articulate for a ghost. What the hell is going on with her? And we kind of got the idea of a god, of Molly turning into a god, but they're kind of Wabbo's hanging a bit of a lampshade on how fast Molly is powering up, which again definitely makes it feel like there's something going on here that we're going to get to see unfold throughout the rest of the story. I don't know what it is.
Well, I mean, you do, but anyway.
Do I? Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theory that I brought up in my live read that, like, as I think on it, still makes sense is, we never found out what Johannes's very big ghost is. Like, I remember when it was when Jeremy first went to Johannes's domain, and it was just like, oh yes, and he has a very big ghost. And like, I wonder if Johannes is the one kind of fueling Molly, because I mean, it seems to be working out for him, possibly better than he expected. But at the very least, it's like Molly's just caused so much chaos in the town, and he and whatever of his crew he wants to keep safe are just safe in his domain.
Yeah, Molly seems to have been, I mean, justifiably angry at the Behemoths and also the Duchamps, but never really wanted to make any plays against Johannes, not that we've seen so far at least.
She mentioned when she wanted everyone to give a kid for her to kill, she said Johannes would have to sacrifice something like of equal value or whatever. But, I mean, I guess that's sort of the thing, is he knew he would be less of a target, especially because he's got his domain to hide in.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting theory. Let's see how it pans out, I guess. Another thing that left me feeling odd, I think, about this is Molly leaves very abruptly in this conversation. Like, there's this... She kind of... I could interpret it, I guess, as her getting in the last word and then leaving, which I think is a fair interpretation, but it just feels like she leaves a little earlier than I would have expected her to, which makes me think something is going on again.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely, it feels off the way she leaves, because she's like halfway through an argument with Blake, basically. Like, Blake makes a point, she rebuts it, and then she just doesn't show up again. Yeah, I don't know. I was very confused. I'm interested to see what she's thinking the next time we see her, because it does just feel weird the way she just leaves this conversation.
Yeah, or maybe it's that she actually isn't as powerful as she's trying to appear, and she just ran out of body forming juice or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like she complains about all the power she's expended for Blake, so maybe she is just having to be a lot more careful with conserving it. But that doesn't really fit her whole like revenge monster vibe. Like if
Yeah.
she's pissed off at Blake, I would have thought. So yeah, I don't know. Like I guess we'll see.
Yeah. Anywho, Blake and his team continue to follow the Duchamps, basically keeping an eye on them.
Yeah, but they also, I mean, he knows that whenever he can see them, they'll know where he is. So I love that his idea is just, well, I'm just going to like walk out there openly and just kind of be a scary villain.
Yeah.
Walking like a block along, just being out in the open and putting bits of fear in everyone and just scaring them and acting like he could move at any minute. Like he's so terrifying now.
Yeah, he's a full-on movie monster, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we get... I absolutely love. We get a glimpse of this good karma practitioner, the benevolent, and he just seems so out of place in the world. Like it's so delightful. He basically is just wearing like good luck charms and stuff, and he seems like he's cheerily whistling along to himself as he walks. Like he's such a not packed character. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, he's a really sort of fresh idea in this world. I love how he has these giant beads for a necklace. And, like, one's a four-leaf clover, and you're sort of like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Traditional symbol for luck. That's sort of his whole deal. I get it. Then there's one that's like a sun, and I was sort of like, yeah, okay, like, light, heat, the sun. Okay, that's a fairly sensible image. And then one's just got, like, a smiley face on it.
Yeah.
And, like, so when it's just like, okay, like, he's just taking the piss now.
He's a big fan of Watchmen. What can you say?
Like it's just such a silly icon for someone to have in a battle like this. It really sort of stands out as so unique. It's great.
And again, Blake looks at him and clearly has the impression of like, okay, he doesn't look very strong. But then his reaction is like, maybe he's a trap. I'd better not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's why this guy could just stroll through a battlefield.
Yeah.
And just be really chill about it. Although not too chill because the cold doesn't seem to affect him, which is also funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So then Blake is basically, at this point, looking at each of the possible targets to decide who he should kill next. And he eventually decides that the Pyromancer is a pretty good target. And he has this moment where he thinks to himself, I was already pretty goddamn jealous of anyone who had someone. Knowing that he'd had it and he'd ruined it, that he'd had it and he'd ruined it, that he'd perverted it and made it something ugly, that's enough justification for Blake, right? And I think this is a very interesting line because Blake has demonstrated a few times that he doesn't really want to pursue any kind of romantic relationship. But this line clearly indicates he still wants close connection to people, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's hope for Green Lake yet, which is their ship name, I'm calling it. The other thing I like about this line is Blake calls out, oh no, I can't stand people who would take a good relationship and pervert it into something ugly. And then later on this chapter, he takes this young boy that he has a close relationship and gets him to murder somebody. So that's totally not what you would do, Blake.
Yeah, I completely agree with that second comparison. That feels very deliberate. It's so perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, going back to sort of your first point about like Blake and not really wanting romantic relationships, but wanting like some sort of relationship. I mean, I think his framing here is a really important encapsulation of his current state of mind. Because yes, obviously, as we've touched on, he's a massive dickhead to Evan for the rest of this chapter. And I mean, they just straight up leave Green Eyes behind a number of times.
Yeah.
But this isn't super new. Like, this chapter really ups it a notch in how much he's treating these two like shit. But, like he's been abandoning them and kind of asking them to do not good things since they got out of the drains, I'd say.
Yeah.
And it just all really feels like it's tying into that idea that he hasn't trackled since he was in the drains and had his his past visions or whatever about how he's like a bit of a user and an abuser of people. And we brought this up kind of a number of times, and now it really feels like he's lost the Cabal and Rose, and so he set himself up on this mission, and he's kind of just dragged the only two people who will still follow him around, and he's using them more than ever. Like, it just really feels like this sort of, he's been hurt, and he's kind of escalating and doubling down on that sort of behavior is kind of how it's starting to feel like. And just this idea of like him being like, oh, just how hurt he is by losing the Cabal is sort of keeping him from seeing how much hurt he's causing to Evan and Green Eyes, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word losing the Cabal, right? Because I don't see it that way. Like, I definitely see it as him choosing to leave them behind, right? And I think the same thing applies to Rose, although to a lesser extent. Sure, there was that kind of betrayal vision, which in his mind makes him think, okay, I can't super trust these people, but he's chosen to not bring them on his next missions, right? Maybe because they would disagree with doing it, which I think is a fair point from them. But,
yeah.
But also, he never really... the plan, if I remember, was burn down the house, then go back and regroup, right? Like, that's just been long forgotten. He's just totally ditched them. I don't know.
I mean, I guess, yeah, the phrasing of losing them, I agree with that. Like, my idea of phrasing as losing them is that's sort of his perspective in that he thought he was reforming this connection, and then he saw a vision of this betrayal and has sort of given up on... he seemingly has given up on a hope of restoring his bond with these guys. I don't know, or just temporarily shelved it at least. So there's this real sense that he's sort of lost his hope and connection with them right now, I guess is just sort of how I see his thinking on it. I agree, I don't necessarily think he has, but I think that's what he's thinking right now. Yeah,
and I would have probably put the Thorburns into that same category as well, where he had left them behind, but last chapter, or the chapter before, he explicitly brought Peter/Ellie and Christoph into the chat room, which seems like an act of kind of trusting them. So I don't know where his head's at with relation to them, but it seems clear that he doesn't feel like he has many people he can call allies right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So Blake... As Blake is walking parallel with the Duchamps, he notices that they look different. And he realizes just in time that Hilda is no longer walking with the Duchamps. And as he realizes this, Hilda lands right next to them and a fight starts.
Yeah, it's something that's sort of been built up a little bit in this chapter and some of the other ones is Blake feels very fragile right now. Like, obviously, he's able to recover. And he sort of talked earlier about how hurt is temporary because he can just, shove more twigs or find more people bones around. But he does feel very light and kind of snappable at the moment. So the idea of a very strong and fast troll feels very terrifying. Like, I was very worried for Blake because I'm like, well, Hilda could easily just smash him apart so fully that he's not going to recover.
Yeah, it really feels like if Hilda gets a good grab on him, Blake's at least going back to the abyss for a while.
Yeah, that'd be best case scenario, I think.
Yeah, I love how as soon as Hilda lands, the story effectively conveys what type of troll this is, right? Because the word troll has a lot of baggage, I guess, contextually. Trolls are stupid, trolls are slow. Trolls are strong, but they're slow and stupid, right? And in this chapter, immediately Hilda lands and is going and is quick and is clearly clever, or at least maybe not clever, but at least like with it.
Yeah, I mean, Hilda seems terrifying.
Yeah, a good familiar choice, Sandra.
Yeah.
So Hilda is, chasing Blake, and some other people get involved. There's a satyr here for a second. And actually, there's this interesting bit where Evan pretty explicitly saves Blake here. This satyr comes and tries to headbutt Blake and then almost grabs him. And Evan seems to ensure that Blake doesn't get caught. So, again, without Evan, Blake would 100% be dead, right?
Yeah. I mean, these instinct for escape and the escape powers that Evan has just complement Blake's whole run into the middle of a battle and bite off more than I can chew tactic so well, because obviously he can run in, bite off more than he can chew, and then still get out thanks to Evan.
Yeah.
I mean, like, speaking of, his response to this satyr charging him is he just charges all the Duchamps.
Bad plan, Blake. Yeah. So Hilda continues to chase Blake, and basically these other Duchamp squads are throwing enchantment tricks at him. And they're really working together, and it's like they work really well together. I kind of like it.
They're so well coordinated, it feels rehearsed at least.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Although it's interesting, thinking about it now, it's only the Duchamp women that are taking part in this, right?
Yeah, apart from that one example with the pyromancer that was early in the chapter and presumably is no longer existing, most of it's described as like trios of the women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Duchamp women clearly work well together. I guess.
I think that's an embodiment kind of their family dynamic. Really,
Yeah.
it's the Duchamp.
Yeah, true.
Were they a coven? They were a coven, weren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you'd call them a coven.
One of the groups was a coven. Was it the
No, it was
the
the
Bahames are a
sisters of
circle.
the Sisters of the Torch are definitely a coven. I'd call the Bahames a coven.
I think the word coven was specifically used to the Duchamps.
Okay.
Anyway, but like you get that sense, right? That it's like that part of the family first, and whoever you marry, I mean, they're just a tool for the family.
Yes.
That's obviously something like we're starting to see those relationships for how fragile they kind of are for the most part. Like I think Sandra's going to stand as a unique example of when this isn't the case, because her and Jeremy clearly have something, and it's going to be heartbreaking when we finally get there.
Yeah. That's interesting. And maybe that's the comparison we're meant to make is the bonds of marriage. If you just marry someone as a tool, as a power play, that's not a recipe for success. And that's obviously quite directly comparable to Blake and Evan. Although Blake didn't marry, in air quotes, Evan for that reason, it does seem to be a utility-based partnership right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's touch on how Team Blake is going right now. Green Eyes basically disappears from the story for a bit, which I didn't notice for my first read, so I'm as bad as Blake.
Me either. I totally... When she showed up, I was like, oh yeah, where's Green Eyes?
Where have you been? Yeah. But Blake basically a few times grabs Evan out of the air and just like swats him around or taps him on stuff to like very directly use his magic. Evan refers to it as Tinkerbelling, which is very on point.
It's so perfect. I was trying to come up with, like, as I was reading, I was trying to come up with a witty way to describe it, and then I just got to the bit where Evan called it Tinkerbelling, and I was like, nah, fuck, that's it. I'm not doing better than that. Yeah, I mean, the first time he does this, he just sort of grabs Evan out of the air and, like, swats him in front of him.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like, what's this? Like, that's a bit rude, isn't it? Using him as a power battery like this. And Evan makes the sound of annoyance. So you're like, oh, okay, this is bad. But Blake will get the hint, right?
Can we read some out? Let's read some.
Yeah.
So here's one that I really liked. Blake says, I pulled on the door handle, touching it with the hand that still held Evan, and found it only opened about half a foot. So he tries to open a door, and then he's like, not working. Let me try with Evan. And he just like rubs him on the door handle and then tries again. Horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one for me is when he's running through the store and all the clothes and their hooks are kind of grabbing his sweatshirt. And so his quote is, I used Evan to club my way free.
Jesus
so he's
Christ.
just like, yeah, I mean, and there's another bit that we're about to get into where he asks Evan for help battling the troll. And like Evan's trying to confront him about how Blake has just started like literally using him.
Yeah.
And Evan's like, oh yeah, she's hunted me a bunch. And Blake's kind of like, well, now she's hunting me. And it's just the way it was phrased, especially after what he did. It immediately sent off all these alarm bells in my head where I'm just like, Blake, I don't know, this isn't all about you. Like, yeah. I mean, obviously your life's in danger or whatever, but it's just the way he kind of dismisses Evan in this moment. It just really didn't sit right with me. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's kind of dismissive of Evan a lot, right? Throughout this, Evan kind of tries to confront him, and Blake doesn't really engage with it. He'll either change the topic or he'll at one point actually he in his head basically thinks of what Evan is saying as a petulant outburst. Like his narration changes to show how annoyed he is with Evan, wanting to confront the fact that he's being Tinkerbelled. Like it's so disrespectful.
Yeah, well, he basically gets out onto like the he gets out onto the rooftop and he's like, oh, this is nice. And then Evan says something and he calls it like, Evan's like, oh, Evan's ruined the moment with a petulant outburst.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what?
Yeah, ruined what moment, Blake? The moment of you running away from a troll? What are you talking about?
Yeah, sorry, this has only just occurred to me. I'm gonna have to look this up. There was like a moment like this in Alistair's interlude, wasn't there?
Was there?
I feel like there was a bit where he was just sort of like enjoying a moment or something, and then somebody spoke, and it was like, oh, they've ruined the day or something. I don't
Maybe
know. Maybe I'm
Ainsley?
wrong.
That feels like how he treated Ainsley.
Yeah, like I think it might have been like it was just something in the way. There was like a moment with Ainsley or something where he felt incredibly dismissive, and it feels like yeah, I don't know. It's just this memory's too vague. I shouldn't have brought this up, but yeah. I mean, basically, Evan tries like a couple of times to bring up how unimpressed he is with how Blake has been treating him, and Blake just kind of dismisses it for various reasons. Some of those are more valid than others. Like there is one where there's a troll 5 feet away, so it's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll give you that one. Like this isn't the time. But then it's like things slow down for a second, and Evan tries to bring it up, and Blake's like, oh no, I was doing it for you to keep you safe. It's, fuck off, you were.
Yeah. Not convincing, Blake.
No.
So they've made it up onto the roof now, and they do have a respite because it seems that Hilda has lost them or isn't able to follow them that effectively. And in this moment, Blake kind of looks around and finds a trash can that he then kind of fills up with salt and ice, packing it tight until it turns into a little makeshift missile to be dropped on an unsuspecting husband.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding this 100% clearly. Blake gets a bin, and he fills it so tightly with ice and salt that even when you hold it upside down, nothing falls out.
Yep, tightly packed.
It's like a Dairy Queen blizzard.
Yep.
And he gets Evan to drop it on a person in the head.
So he drops it, and then Evan... So this is as if this makes it okay. He drops it, and then Evan just makes sure it hits the right target.
yeah. I mean that feels like pedantics, right? Which this is Pact, so fair.
It's even
he makes Evan more than an accessory.
No,
yeah.
Blake chucks it over the roof, and for Blake it's like, oh, it could hit someone, it could not. Evan's the one who decides who is going to die. Evan is the one that is accountable for this murder, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Blake
he would be if he was an
accountable
adult,
for Evan
I guess.
being accountable. Yeah. I mean, because I struggled to follow this the first time I was reading, because I did not believe that Blake would do this to Evan. Like, the first time I read it, I was like, oh, so they've filled they've just mixed ice or snow and salt into, like, all the dirty rubbish, and then they're, like, throwing rubbish over the people. And then I was sort of like, it's a bit weird that scared them so much.
Yeah.
And then it was sort of later, I went back up and I was like, no, okay, Blake's just pretty much had Evan kill a guy.
Yeah.
And he barely thinks about it. Like there's no confirmation that the guy is dead, really. So there's that shred of hope that one's dead.
I thought this too, but the way they react, the fact that Blake feeds off of their fear and their terror at this means that he is dead. I can't see that happening without the pyromancer being dead, which means that Blake has just got Evan to murder somebody. Look,
I'll give it a 0.1% chance that nobody's dead. Like, that's where I'm at right now. I'm like, I agree. I think it's very,
I'm not
very
even there, honestly.
We don't...
It's 0. But yeah, so Blake, pre-Abyss Blake, and even some post-Abyss Blake, I think, would have wanted to kill the person who did this to Evan, right?
Yes, yeah, 100%. He made so many threats to people over, like, particularly, it was a post-Abyss, just after he got out, like, as you said, there were multiple times where he was like, if you fuck with Evan, like, I will come for you. And, like, this feels like something, even Arc 11 era Blake, if somebody had made Evan do this, he probably just would have killed them.
Even that time when they were talking about what their hopes are, as they were walking up the hill to prepare to burn down the house, like, man, I think even that Blake would have done it. And that's the start of, last chapter? This chapter? That's not very far away.
Like, I get that Blake's whole thing is we're fighting past and the history of things that keeps them stagnant. He seems a bit too willing to forget his past. He's forgetting a conversation that happened in his time couple of hours ago. We've just talked about how he doesn't seem to remember the lesson about how he's a bit of an abuser from the drains. He's someone who's very disconnected from his past since he kind of learnt the truth of it, and I hope he overcomes that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's these things that make me think he's so much more Abyss than we think he is, you know? Like he's so much
Yeah.
less human.
Well, but he was like, he was so weighed down by his past in the first 7 arcs of the book. And then since he's kind of gotten free of that, he seems to have almost entirely gotten free of the concept of reflecting on the past at all.
Yeah.
Basically, even
Yeah.
the recent past.
Yeah. I don't know. It just doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And while they're building this missile, Green Eyes finally catches up. And I just wanted to bring this up because she kind of makes a point. She's like, every time I don't just leap into battle, you guys leave me behind. And this is really noteworthy to me because we've had a number of bits throughout the last, 4 or 5 chapters where Blake keeps being like, oh, why does Green Eyes just always jump into the middle of things? And
Yeah.
she just tells him right here, this is basically, she just sort of straight up says, hey, if I don't just jump into things, you're going to leave me behind. And he's just kind of like, oh, you've led them here. I don't know. I don't know what more Evan and Green Eyes can do to try and communicate with Blake. He's just, he's not responding to what I would think is pretty clear communication of how they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, he just is not getting it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, the pyromancer is presumably dead to this bomb, and this gives Blake enough time to slip away. But of course, he's not happy with the, 7 Duchamps that he's killed so far, so he continues to follow them, ready to add more murders to his belt.
Yeah. And there's a brief bit where Blake is like, well, after this guy dies,
Yeah.
and Blake's sort of like, oh, the screams have reminded me that I'm dealing with humans. But also, like, I'm feeding on the fear, and I don't like it, but it is important, and this boogeyman part of me just wants to leap into the fray, and he doesn't do that. He just follows them to kind of continue the fight. Like, I don't know, it's just this bit where he's sort of like, has reminded me that I've worked with humans, and then there's no second part to that thought.
Yeah.
It's just like, yes, I am dealing with humans. Idea shelved for now. I'm going to kind of continue doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and he basically is reflecting on... This kind of leads him to reflect on his own goals, right? He's reflecting on how he really wants to disrupt the system, but his biggest goal is to get back to being Blake.
Yeah.
And this is good, right? Is this good? This feels good. It feels like it's a good goal for him to set, to try and be more human, to be more Blake.
Well, I just want to read out this whole bit because I want to talk about like a few things from it. So Blake says, I'd been looking for a goal, and I had it, meager as it was. Not a grandiose dream, like being normal again, or riding my bike, or fixing things. I was going to do what I could to steer things towards a better path, and I was going to try to stay true to myself. I'd veer one way or another, along the karmic path or against it. But I was going to be Blake, when all of this was said and done, even if Blake was less than half a person. I set my eyes on my next target, and gave the signal to move on. And so it's that last line that doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy about this idea that you sort of said about, oh, he's going back to Blake. Because, I don't get the impression from that so much that he's thinking, I want to get back to Blake, which is sort of what you implied would be the optimistic read before. He very much is just saying, I'm going to be true to myself. But right now, that true to his self thing is kind of, at best, inconsistent. Like he's part murder monster now, and I don't think he's done a great job of separating those two sides of him in his own head.
I mean, there probably is a worse way of reading it where he can say, at the end of this, I'm going to be Blake. And what that means is either, slightly better, I'm going to do all this and then I'll go back to being a human again, which is shit, but maybe is slightly better than the worse read, which is, well, I'm still me, regardless of what hideous shit I do. And I'm a good person, so I know it can't be that bad.
I mean, that's basically the closest version to my read. Like, I read this as a kind of, I can't beat the system, but I'm not going to join it. I'm just going to do what I think is right and be true to myself and go ahead from there. And in a lot of ways, that's not the worst thing. Like, I don't hate that as a general goal or mission for a lot of people, because if the system is too big and powerful for you to fight, like, the best you can kind of do is just do the best you can. And you don't have to make it crumble if that's not reasonable for you to be able to do. But you don't have to fully conform to it. You can just try and do your best as an individual. And I don't think that that's necessarily the worst message, But Blake is very much embodying the reason that it isn't the perfect message.
Yeah.
Because he is really shit at deciding what the right thing to do is right now. His instincts in that regard are really off base because they're very heavily influenced by boogeyman things, instincts. And so, it's kind of like, I mean, this is something like, I think one of the Captain America movies had this, where Captain America was sort of like, I always stand my ground, and when the whole world tells you no, but you think it's right, you say yes.
That was like, Captain America 3.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, okay, well, that's fine when you're not like a dickhead, but there are plenty of people out there who are dickheads, and so if the whole world's telling them no, it might actually be right. Like, if the whole world's telling you no, you should at least self-reflect.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like, it's just interesting to see Blake moving forward maybe with this mindset when he's so compromised.
Yeah. It's the equivalent of saying something like, well, I'm just blunt. I just tell it how it is. Like, that's a defense for being a shit.
Yeah.
And I think this is the chapter where I don't like Blake. This is the chapter where I'm like, okay, I just can't get behind you, Blake. And maybe it should have been earlier. He's killed 7 people now. Maybe it should have been earlier. Sorry, 8 counting Laird. But I just can't get behind him anymore, right?
Well, I mean, he's only a face now, but like, that's the only part of flesh left, so there's not much to hate, because he's only one strip of him left. But no, I completely agree. He's been falling for a while, and I think I've been complaining for a long time about how I feel like he's losing more and more of his humanity and stuff. But this is finally the point where it's like, okay, he murdered those people, but you could sort of make excuses. And then he just... It feels bad to say, but it's the fact that he starts to cross Evan that I think finally is like, okay, that was the one thing. That was sort of the one thing we could all hold on to, and he's just explicitly made that go away. And this sort of, you've run out of reasons to sort of justify his actions.
It's because Evan is the innocent, right? Like, Evan is so pure that if he's abusing that, there's nothing left, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Evan's the heart of this story, and so crossing and abusing Evan is really the point where you're like, okay, there's like you're doing the opposite of good when you do the opposite of Evan, and so like it's just you can't help but kind of give up on him more than ever, or like an extra step of giving up on Blake in this chapter.
And that's a sad place to leave it, but that's where the chapter ends.
I mean, I feel like I've been saying this for arcs, but we have to be reaching the turning point soon. Like, unless this is just a story about how a good guy gets completely broken down and turns into a monster, eventually I think it's going to have to turn around a bit.
I don't think that's a running theme for Wildbow protagonists, though. I don't think they end up just turning into monsters, do they? Oh, gosh. So, yeah, I guess that's where we'll leave this one. Thanks for joining us for this. Before we wrap up, it's time to revisit our discussion question from this week, which was talking about what might the backstories or the origin stories of various gods in mythology be. An interesting question. We only got a small handful of answers, but let's examine one of our favorite answers, which was given to us by Sahibim7. And so Sahibim tells the story of a theory for how the myth of the Grim Reaper may have got started, right? Basically, the story of a farmer walking home in the rain with his cloak and his scythe one day, getting spotted, and this giving birth to a rumour, and that rumour spreading and spreading until it's strong enough to take on its own incarnation, I suppose you'd call it, that then becomes the Grim Reaper. This was a great read. I really enjoyed it. I'd recommend people read it in our discussion thread from, I think it was 13.5, last chapter. But yeah, I really liked it. So thanks, Sahibim.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a good one. But that said, let's move on to the next discussion question, because we're still going to try and stick to these weekly ones.
Yeah, see how I quite enjoy them.
So our next discussion question coming up for this week is... the world of Pact is a world of systems. Games are also things made of systems. Which parts of Pact would make for good games/video games? Which parts would be bad? Yeah, so I guess, basically just a little game design prompt this
Yeah,
week.
game design, but also I think it's interesting to think about what systems would be entertaining for people to engage with as a different lens to take a look at Pact for. Because Pact is a world of practitioners who choose to opt into these systems, and I think that's an interesting lens to see, well, what are the parts that would be engaging and entertaining to opt into?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
we'll be talking about that one in Execution 13.9 next Monday.
Yep. Where can people leave their answers, Elliot, to this question?
You can drop those in our discussion thread on Reddit. That's probably the best place.
Mm-hmm. And the link to that will be in our episode notes down below. So thanks for joining us, folks.
And if you want to, give us a hand and spread word of the show so we get more discussion, question, answers, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, what are some other, like Podbean, I don't know. But wherever you get your podcasts, yeah. And chuck a review in there, give us good numbers, more people discover Pact, we'll all be happier, except for Blake, apparently.
Yep. He's never going to be happy, let's be real. If you want to engage more with the show, the best place to do that is on our Twitter, which is @MediaMD Podcast. We do the live reads there, and people tweet at us, and we respond sometimes. It's good fun.
Mm-hmm. The other place we can often be found is on the Doof Media Discord, which is a perk of Patreoning us at patreon.com/Doof Media.
Yes.
For $1 a month, you get access to that Discord and all the great discourse that goes on there.
Yes, that also gives you access to the Doof Media Minecraft server, which is a personal favorite of mine. And there are a bunch of awesome perks that you can get at different levels on the Patreon, such as the $5 a month tier lets you tune in and take part in our monthly Doof and Chill sessions. The newest one of those happened yesterday, and we did a role-playing game that was very erotic, and it was good fun. So if you want to check that out, go to patreon.com/doofmedia and back us for $5 a month or more.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And if you're interested in learning more about the Doof Network, head on to doofmedia.com. You can find out about all the other great shows. There's Do the Right Thing, of course, which both of us have been on recently, and that's just where everyone takes turns writing some short stories and getting feedback on them, and it's a fun thing to get involved with, and there's a great little community forming around it.
Yeah. And if you want to support Wildbow, he also has a Patreon. He is a Patreon-supported author, so head on over to patreon.com/Wildbow if you want to support him making all these great stories.
Yes, because we still want them. They're very good.
And apart from that, we will see you on Wednesday the 20th with our next episode, Execution 13.7. So we'll see you then.
See you then.